Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. Before we start the discussion, I have a couple of important announcements. Recently, UPSC has announced the results for 2025 Civil Services Examination, and we are proud to say that Unacademy learners have performed spectacularly well. Out of the 900 plus vacancies, 585 plus toppers are from Unacademy platform. And to be honest, out of the total results, more than 110 plus students were paid learners of Unacademy who had subscribed to online classes, which includes All India Rank 1 Anuj Agnihotri. Many others, around 300 plus toppers, they were part of Unacademy's free classes, such as special classes that we conduct on the platform. And few others were part of just the mock interview, the interview guidance program. So, to celebrate the success of Unacademy's learners, we are providing a flat 60% discount on all our courses. You can now avail a subscription at just 16,999, and you will also get double validity. That is, if you take a 6-month subscription, you get 6 months free extension. Same for 12 and 18-month subscription as well. You will also get CSE Assure. That is, if you take a subscription of more than 18 months, and let's say for some reason you don't clear the exam in your first attempt, then your next attempt is entirely on us. So to avail the special offer, you need to click on the link provided in the video description. But on the subscription page, you will see a different price. To avail the discount, you need to enter the code IAS English. So those interested, please check out the offer today itself, because I'm told the offer is going to end tonight. So with this, let's get started and look at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 8 important topics. And these topics will cover roughly around 15 articles. Because the topic on the war in Iran and the energy crisis that India and the world is facing, it consists of multiple articles in today's newspaper, and I'll be clubbing all of them into one single discussion. So let's cover all these 8 topics in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. See, the very purpose of these sessions is to help you not just read and understand the newspaper. It's also to help you cover most of the key topics, including the static portion, which is connected to these current affairs, so that it becomes a one-stop destination, a single solution for dealing with current affairs and connecting it with your static portion. So let's start with the first topic for today. On page number 8, there is a column on India's research, development, and innovation landscape. This article helps us gauge India's performance in the field of research and development and innovation. It basically answers the question, where does India stand with regard to scientific advancement? See, right now, there is a lot of ambition on the part of the government of India to position India as a leading hub of scientific research, development, and innovation. That intent is definitely there on the part of the government. This intent is clearly visible with the ambitious funding and the schemes and the programs that the government has been launching in recent years. But what is missing is active private sector participation. The private sector is not actively participating in India's scientific journey. The private industries, research firms, they're not making adequate investments to make use of the benefits the government is providing. See, the government is not only pumping money to the tune of billions of dollars into scientific research and innovation, it is also coming out with various schemes to provide the required infrastructure and the logistical support. The government is providing tax-related incentives to tech startups and tech startups so that they can focus on more innovation and bring out more patents from India, so that India could hold more intellectual property and eventually guide and influence the global technological developments. But however, the lack of participation from our private industry is creating this paradox. It's a very strange paradox which has been created in the Indian scientific landscape, where the government has the intent to push for greater research. There are sufficient schemes, funds available. Strict regulations of the previous era, they have been removed, and the government has made it much easier today for private entities to take up scientific research and long-term innovation. But despite this support from the government, the private sector is not enthusiastic about focusing on long-term research and innovation. This paradox is what is being examined in this article. So let's dive a little deep into the topic, and I'll take you beyond the article as well, as we look at some key statistics and data to understand the extent of private sector participation in research, development, and innovation. So, first, let's look at what the government of India has been doing with regard to research, development, and innovation. Because before we blame the private sector entirely, let's properly evaluate what the government has done. What are the specific schemes and initiatives the government has rolled out to support innovation in the country? If you remember last year, in 2025, the government of India announced the establishment of the RDI Fund, Research Development Innovation Fund, with a government contribution of 1 lakh crore rupees. That's nearly $12 billion in terms of US dollars. That's a massive investment of $12 billion. Of course, the investment would not happen in 1 year, it's over a period of time. But still, it's a substantial capital infusion by the government to incentivize and strengthen research, development, and innovation. In this year's budget, if you look at the 2026 budget, the government has set aside 20,000 crore rupees to fund and incentivize deep tech startups in India. Startups which are focusing on cutting edge research on critical emerging technologies, including AI, quantum computing, etc. They are getting special incentives from the government. Then look at Atal Tinkering Labs, a flagship initiative of the Modi government. The financial allocation for Atal Tinkering Labs has increased by 6 times. The previous allocation was barely 500 crores. Now it has jumped to 3,200 crores. Atal Tinkering Lab, it acts as an incubation center to provide mentoring and required support for entrepreneurs in the country, for startups which are coming up. So, such financial support and incubation support is being provided by the government. Along with this, a lot of tax incentives have been announced. Some of the strict regulations which existed previously, which was hampering research and innovation, they have all been removed, or at least they have been relaxed. Now, for example, previously for a startup to avail the benefits of a government scheme, which is funded by the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research, there was a condition. The condition was the startup should have been in existence for at least 3 years. Only those research companies or innovation firms and startups which have already existed for minimum 3 years, only they could avail the funds of government schemes which are funded by the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. This has now been removed. Even a new age startup, which was set up maybe a few months ago or just 1 year ago, even they are now eligible for government funding through the Department of Scientific and Industrial Research. Then, if you look at the Shanti Act, which has liberalized the nuclear sector, it has removed the ban on patenting any invention in the atomic energy sector. Since previously the atomic energy sector was the monopoly of the public sector, applying for patents in the field of atomic research was completely banned in India. It was prohibited. So basically, private sector innovation was not even allowed in the nuclear domain. So now through the Shanti Act, which was enacted last year by the parliament, the government has removed this ban, which encourages private sector to invest in nuclear research, in atomic energy research and innovation. So such big regulatory changes have taken place. Sufficient funding has been mobilized, capital is being infused. Look at the Anusandhan National Research Foundation and how well the foundation is funded. So much of the effort is coming from the government, from the public sector. When you look at what the private sector is doing, you will see the mismatch that is present. See, India has done pretty well in recent years to rise up the ranks in the Global Innovation Index. The GII is the leading barometer to measure a country's progress in the field of scientific research and innovation. It mainly focuses on the scientific output, the number of patents which are being produced from the country, and how the innovation is translating into market opportunities, into business opportunities. This is where India is lacking. We are neither producing enough number of patents and intellectual property, nor the scientific ideas are being translated into market model or business model. So, though India has performed pretty well on the Global Innovation Index, there is much that needs to be done, particularly from the private sector, and the government needs to work with the private industries in this regard. When you look at the Global Innovation Index, India's rank has risen to 38th position out of 139 economies. If you look at the patent output coming out from India, it has doubled in the last 4 years. In 2020-21, from India, 59,000 patents were produced. This has doubled to nearly 1 lakh 10,000 by 2024-25. So when you look at the numbers in isolation, this looks like a great performance by India. That India's scientific output has doubled in just 4 years. So this is indeed something to be celebrated. But the real picture will emerge when you compare India with other leading scientific economies and developed advanced economies. You might say it's an unfair comparison, right? Comparing India with a developed nation like Japan or US might be unfair. Now forget that. Let's compare India with similarly placed countries. Let's take the BRICS grouping, for example. Within the BRICS group, apart from South Africa, India is the worst performer when compared to Brazil, Russia, and China. China is miles ahead of India in terms of scientific output. Same with Brazil. They are making much more investments and there is greater private sector participation as well. So even within the same group of countries, such as BRICS and other comparable economies, India falls behind significantly. Though our scientific progress has improved, though the number of patents have doubled, when you compare this with others, we are still many, many steps behind. So this has to do with the investments that are happening in scientific research and development. We are spending very, very less amount of money on research, development, and innovation. As a percentage of GDP, we are spending barely 0.65%. India's gross expenditure on research development, or GERD, which is a vital indicator, though it has increased in terms of the capital being infused, as a percentage of GDP, it remains at just 0.65%, which is very, very low compared to what other countries are investing. Even small nations like Singapore, Switzerland, they have a much higher investment ratio as compared to their GDP in research, development, and innovation. China, Japan, US, all these scientific giants, they are many, many steps ahead of India. So here we can't blame the government entirely because right now it is the government of India which is doing the heavy lifting. The entire heavy lifting is being done by government agencies, public sector research organizations. The blame primarily lies with the private sector, which has not shown the appetite to invest more in R&D. Because see, research, development, and innovation, it always calls for long-term investment. You can't expect immediate profits out of it. To bring out new innovation, it will take decades of research sometimes. 10, 15, 20 years would be the life cycle, the average life cycle of any new innovation to happen. Now, right now, the reason why India can't influence global technology trends is because the private sector is driven by a very short-term objective. They're mainly focused on keeping their businesses alive, making profits in the short term and raising their revenue, but they're not focused on long-term innovation and asset creation. Though there is enough capital available with private industry, they're not putting the money in research because they know that it will not get them immediate profits, immediate returns. It is this mindset which needs to change from the private sector in India. There is a significant gap when you look at the expenditure on R&D. I'll give you the breakdown. Right now, government spending is 64% of what is being spent on R&D in our country. Private sector is barely investing 36%. Look at the mismatch. That's why I said government of India and government sector agencies, they are doing the heavy lifting when it comes to R&D and innovation. When you look at other countries like China, US, or even a country like Japan, South Korea, or Singapore, the numbers are exactly the opposite. Government funding is hardly around 20 to 30% in other developed advanced economies. Private investment in research would be in the tune of 60 to 70%, sometimes even 80%. So this points towards the lack of expertise to turn research into market opportunities, the lack of patience on the side of the investors to wait for long-term results. And as a result, India becomes a dependent nation. This has strategic implications as well. Today, we are not really in a position to influence the big changes happening in global technology, from AI to new forms of communication to semiconductors. And then later we cry, saying we are dependent on others, others are manipulating us, they are pressurizing us, because we are not able to become self reliant as there isn't adequate participation from the private sector. So this requires decades of effort, decades worth of investment, and the government alone can't pull it off. And despite the government showing the intent, coming out with ambitious schemes, funds, and initiatives, the private sector is still not mobilizing itself. So when you look at China and United States, India is producing around 1 lakh and above patents per year. China is producing 1.6 million domestic patents with a total of 1.8 million patent applications. US, on the other hand, files around 6 lakh patents each year, with nearly half of it being domestic patents. These numbers are very, very low for India. When you compare India's 1 lakh odd patents with China's 1.8 million and 6 lakh of US, that clearly shows the stark difference, right? If you have to become a developed nation, you need to make advances in scientific research, development, and innovation. Investments of today will reap the benefits probably 20, 30 years later. Now, if you don't have that patience to wait, and if you're only obsessed with short-term profits, you will simply end up becoming a service-based economy, and you will not genuinely bring out any major products which could drive the next generation of technology. The reason why China dominates the global economy today is not just because of its manufacturing strength. It's mainly because China today can control technology and define the next wave of technology as well. Now, when you look at the foreign patents which are filed, patents can be filed in foreign jurisdiction as well, where innovation can be protected by making use of the WIPO regulations, the World Intellectual Property Organization. Under WIPO, there is a treaty known as Patent Cooperation Treaty. Please make a note of this. It was negotiated in 1970 in Washington. Under the Patent Cooperation Treaty of World Intellectual Property Organization, there is a single window opportunity which has been created for innovators to file for patents in foreign jurisdictions as well, in order to protect their innovation and their intellectual property. Now, this again is a marker of scientific progress which is happening in the country. The number of foreign patents your researchers are acquiring, your companies and institutions are acquiring, is a clear marker of progress happening in innovation. From India, out of the 1 lakh plus patents that we are getting, hardly around 4,500 patents were filed in foreign jurisdiction. Now compare this with others. China, on an average, gets around 70,000 plus patents every year. US, around 54,000. Japan, over 48,000. Now again, you might say it's like comparing apples and oranges. How can you compare India with a developed, advanced economy? Now, even if you compare India with small countries like Singapore, as I said, Singapore produces more number of foreign patents than India. Same with Switzerland, right? So this again points towards the inadequate participation of the private industry. Now, even when you look at the human capital in India, which is engaged in research, development, and innovation, we are lagging behind the rest of the world. When you look at India's human capital indicators in the domain of research, development, innovation, The employment rank of India is 95. We are ranked 95th in terms of employment in knowledge based sectors. When you look at the total number of researchers in the field of R&D and innovation, we are ranked at number 80. These are not desirable ranks for India. When you look at the gender gap in research development and innovation, there is a massive gap as we have very few women researchers in this domain. The gender diversity is directly correlated with advances in scientific innovation. If you look at China, US, for example, or Japan, as the gender diversity improved, as more women participated in scientific innovation, the country's scientific progress also saw a significant jump. So there is a direct correlation between the two. But India's ranking, when gender diversity is taken into account, is a very poor 101 out of 119 economies. We are in the bottom rung. This is despite the government having dedicated schemes. We have the Vidushi scheme, Women's Instinct for Developing and Ushering in Scientific Heights and Innovations. We have Wise Kiran, Women in Science and Engineering, to encourage greater participation of women in scientific research and innovation. But the persisting social divide and the nature of a patriarchal society, and also the lack of opportunities in the private sector, it keeps women researchers away from the field. And this again is a significant setback for India. So there are multiple improvements that India will have to focus upon. Right? The government has been doing its bit. Now it's up for the private sector and the research institutions in the country to rise up, make use of the opportunities being provided by the government. The government also will have to create a more conducive environment, at least to address the gender gap and to ensure that human capital issues are addressed, ensuring the right talent is made available. Though India produces a large number of engineers, doctors, and scientists, they are not adequately employed. The salaries remain very poor. Whereas when you look at top company executives, right, there is a huge mismatch in the pay. So there is no incentive for researchers to stay in India and innovate because they don't get paid adequately when you compare them with the pays that they get abroad. So these are the fundamental problems which need to be solved if India has to emerge as a leading hub of innovation. So based on this, please take up a practice question. It's a very important topic for economy and science and technology under GS paper 3. Very similar questions have been asked in previous mains exam. You can even get an essay topic on this. In fact, this is a great essay topic as to why India is lagging behind in scientific research. Though India has made some progress, individually the numbers look great. Number of patents have jumped, the investments have gone up, right? But when you compare it with rest of the world, then you will realize the gap. Then you will realize how far behind India is. So identifying the issues and suggesting measures, what can be done, I think would be required for any such question. So please take up this question for your answer writing practice. Now moving on to the next topic, again from economy. On page number 8, there's a column where the writer is evaluating the new labor codes and its impact on workers in India. See, in 2020, the government pushed a major labor reform. All the previous labor-related laws that dealt with labor rights, labor welfare, etc., some of which were of colonial origin, they were all replaced with a new set of labor codes. 4 new labor codes were introduced. But there has been strong opposition and criticism against it from workers' union, trade unions, and from experts as well. After a long delay, last year in December 2025, the government has finally notified the rules which will bring the new labor codes into effect. They will start coming into operation with the notification of the final rules. So the writer is evaluating the new set of rules with the provisions of the new labor codes and helps us understand what could be the impact on workers. The government has argued that the new labor codes are designed to improve ease of doing business in the country. In this regard, the government is absolutely right because some of the outdated factory laws of India, the outdated labor laws of India, some of which were of colonial origin, some of which were rooted in the socialist era principles, they had done more harm to the Indian economy. They had created a lot of restrictions, and it basically provided for excessive government control over factories and industries, which crippled the flexibility and autonomy of the private sector. The era of Inspector Raj, License Raj, which bred corruption, which empowered government inspectors to interfere with uh, factory and business operations. This had crippled the Indian economy for decades. It had made it extremely difficult and challenging. There were numerous guidelines and laws with regard to labor rights, which was seen as unnecessary or unfair for employers, which was seen as a big hurdle for private investors and capitalists. So all the complicated laws have now been streamlined, simplified. Unnecessary laws have been done away with. And a new set of framework has been created to promote ease of doing business, which can benefit the factory owners and the industry owners in the country. Especially MSME industries can benefit. The large industries stand to benefit as well. At the same time, the government has said that the new labor codes will protect labor rights. It will not abandon the rights of workers and ensure the welfare of laborers in the country. So that's the promise of the government, that these laws and the rules that have been notified, it strikes a balance with regard to ease of doing business on one side and protection of labor rights and welfare on the other side. Now, these changes have been welcomed by the industry as well. The private industry, the factory owners, the employers, they've all welcomed these changes because obviously the new laws and rules benefit the industry. But however, serious concern is being expressed by the civil society, by workers' union, trade unions, with regard to the compromise being made on the rights of workers in the country under the new labor codes. So let's try to look at both sides of the argument. The article takes a very biased view, but in between, I will present the view of the government and the industry as well. But it's equally important to acknowledge the genuine concern being expressed by workers' union, because these laws could have a significant impact on the bargaining power of workers, especially with regard to factories, manufacturing industries. The government has claimed that because of the new rules and the new laws, there will be a significant formalization of Indian economy. Because see, right now, most workers are in the informal sector. More than 80% of India's workforce, they operate in the informal sector. Through these new set of laws under the new labor codes, the government is confident that it will increase formalization from around 60.4% to 75% in the coming 4 to 5 years. The government also says that these laws will increase opportunities for employment. It will push the factories and industries in manufacturing and in services to hire more workers, creating more than 7 to 8 million jobs. It is expected to bring down unemployment and also boost female labor force participation rates, which is again a key indicator of gender diversity. The government has relaxed some of the restrictions, which can incentivize factories and companies to hire more female employees. And cumulatively, these changes are expected to drive GDP growth and contribute 1.25% to India's GDP by 2029-2030, by the end of the decade. While the claims of the government looks very optimistic, very promising, the question is, can the new set of rules really deliver on the promises that are being made? Because when much of the country works in the informal space, the changes that are being proposed and which are going to be implemented soon could detrimentally affect the workers in the informal sector. For example, when you look at employment numbers in the country and the trend of recruiting workers by the employers, there is one very clear sign which is visible. See, when there is more regulation, when there is more focus on implementing certain rules with regard to employment, when there is more focus on creating formal employment, that is permanent work, where factories hire workers for the permanent payroll, where they remain on the payroll of the company and they enjoy additional benefits along with job security. They get some additional benefits that includes insurance, social security, with regard to PF contribution, gratuity payments, and also timely wages. There's a guarantee that you get when you are a full-time employee, right? I'm sure many of you can relate to this. Those of you who are working would any day prefer a full-time employment to be on the payroll of the company, so that you first have that sense of job security. You know that you're not going to be removed immediately. Though it's possible, though you can be laid off, for permanent employees, there is that sense of job security to some extent. And you have the guarantee of timely payment of wages, right? That is, if the company is doing well, you know that you will get paid every month. And there is added social security with insurance, PF contribution, pension contribution, gratuity. So this is something which improves the standards for any worker, right? Be it in a factory, be it in a service-based industry. Now, when there are regulations regarding this, pushing companies to hire more full-time employees, most companies will be bound to follow them. But companies have often complained that rigid implementation of such rules creates inflexibility, which can affect their business model, which can affect their profit margins. Because see, hiring more people on full-time basis definitely increases the cost to the company, right? The CTC goes up. It's not just the salary they are paying. They'll have to provide a workspace, basic working conditions, with added social security and benefits. So this increases the overall cost that incurs to the company. So whenever relaxation has been provided anywhere in the world, right, when companies are free to go for contractual part-time employment instead of full-time employees, it has always been noticed that companies prefer contract labor, especially with regard to industries and manufacturing factories and industries. They prefer contractual employment. This is a trend which is being seen today in India in services industry as well. Instead of full-time employment, they are entering into contractual employment of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, and making one-time payments. Sometimes the payments get delayed as well, right? So this basically deprives the workers of all the added benefits that come with full-time employment. They will lose the sense of job security. The contract might be suspended any time. Even after you fulfill your commitments under the contract, you may not be paid on time, right? There have been several delays in payment of the agreed wages. Then with regard to added social security, contractual employees, part-time employees, they don't get insurance and other employee benefits. While this reduces the cost to the company, it gives the company more flexibility for its business plan and for its operations. It directly threatens the welfare of the workers in the country. So studies have established that whenever rules are relaxed, whenever it's made industry friendly rather than worker friendly, it's a known sign that most industries will prefer contractual employment, at least for majority of the workforce, while retaining only a small set of workers on permanent payroll. So this sign is already visible in India, even under the old labor laws that were there. The sign of rising contractual employment and declining full-time employment was very clearly visible. The data shows that full-time employment has fallen from 61% to 47%. That is, in the formal workforce, more than half of the workers are on part-time employment. So this threatens job security for a large population of the country. This could have a cascading effect. It could affect the standard of living of the middle class, right? It's primarily the middle class and the lower classes which will be affected by this. And you see a rise in contractual employment, rising up to 42% and above. So with the new set of laws and further relaxations, it will only encourage the trend where factories and companies will prefer to hire part-time employees. Let's say they have a workforce of 100 people. 80 to 90 of them would be part-time employees on contract. Hardly 10 or 15 would be permanent employees on payroll. So this rising illusion of formalization could compromise the rights of workers, the overall welfare of laborers in the country. It creates the illusion of formalization. that informal workspace is now being formalized, which is good for government tax collection, which is good for better estimation of the growth of the economy. But it will not translate into better benefits for workers and employees who are basically putting their blood and sweat to power the company and the country's economy as well. So that is the big concern being expressed. When you look at one of the labor codes, the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code, all the thresholds that were there to avail certain benefits, they have been raised to such a level that it will basically give more flexibility and freedom for companies to immediately fire employees or even avoid following the labor codes and the norms. See, previously, factories with 10 workers operating with power, they were covered under all labor laws. Now, this threshold has been raised to 20. Then, factories operating without power, previous threshold to be covered under labor laws was 20 minimum employees to be there. Now, it has been raised to 40. So, all the small companies and enterprises, they will not even be covered under the new set of laws. Then previously, if a company had to fire more than 100 people, they had to take permission from the concerned department. Now this threshold has been raised to 300. So this makes it easier for the companies to lay off people, especially contractual employees will be the first to be laid off. And contract labor threshold also has been raised from 20 to 50 contractual employees. So all the small firms, they will not even get covered under the new set of labor laws. And the workers, they will not be eligible for most of the benefits. Right? So that is a serious concern. When you look at the historical data, be it from India or be it from across the world, most workers from the middle class and lower classes, they prefer formal full-time employment, right? Mainly because of the sense of job security. Now, you might say there's not much of difference between permanent employment and part-time employment, right? Eventually, companies can fire at any point of time. That is true. But you can't dismiss the emotional angle here, the psychological security that you get when you have a full-time employment, right? Because workers in this category, they have no other alternatives. They and their entire family depend on this source of livelihood. So pushing the economy towards part-time contractual employment and basically creating a legislative space and a regulatory framework where companies prefer part-time over fixed term employment could become detrimental for the middle class and the lower class. Now, the labor codes, they do have some good provisions. Let's look at the positive as well. For example, the gig economy, platform economy, right, which is the new age economy which has come up, mainly because of all the new apps through which app-based services are delivered. So gig workers who did not have enough protection, enough social security, they are being covered under the new set of labor laws. All the gig companies, platform companies, be it your quick commerce companies, food delivery apps, etc., they all get covered under it. They have to mandatorily contribute 1 to 2% of their annual turnover into a fund which will be controlled through a government entity. This is a good initiative, right? Where the revenue of the company, the turnover, 1 to 2% of it, as defined under the laws, will be a mandatory contribution by all the companies. And through the fund, the government will ensure the welfare of the gig workers. But however, there is a flaw here as well. The laws and the rules, they don't define as to how exactly the gig workers and platform workers will benefit from this fund. Money will be collected. How will it be utilized? Who will manage the fund? Would it entirely be the government or would there be representatives of worker and trade unions? What kind of schemes will be implemented? Any insurance scheme or any proper social security scheme for gig and platform workers? This has not been spelled out by the government. This will be defined through subsequent schemes which the government will come out with. So there's no clarity on how the fund would be utilized. Right? Establishing the fund is good, where the private companies will contribute 1 to 2% of their annual turnover into this fund. So government will manage to raise that capital that's required. But what will be done with the fund? How will workers benefit? That has not been spelled out. Then, to protect workers who are fired, who are removed from their job, the government has set up another fund, the Reskilling Fund for Retrenched Workers. This is also provided under the new labor codes. This again seems like a great initiative where companies are contributing some money to this fund, which the government is going to utilize for upskilling, training, and other vocational programs, so that workers who are fired, they can be imparted with new skills, and better work opportunities will arise out of that, so that they can find employment eventually. But again, the details are not provided. There's no clarity on how the scheme will operate, what kind of skills will be imparted. So government will again collect funds from the private companies, but how will it benefit the workers who are retrenched, who are removed from their jobs? That is not clearly spelled out. See, government is very good at levying cess, surcharges, and various other taxes, collecting those funds. Many such funds exist, but eventually it's all about how it will be utilized, how it will be spent. Will it benefit the actual beneficiaries? This is not clearly spelled out under the new labor codes. Then, when you come towards the wages, the floor wage and the minimum wage, under the code on wages, which is one of the four labor codes, the national floor wage and minimum wage is provided for. But however, the government has not defined as to what's the methodology and how are they different. See, there are many critics in the industry, especially in the private sector, who criticize the concept of a minimum wage or a floor wage. They believe that when you have a high threshold of minimum wage, companies will be disincentivized to hire more people because their expenditure will increase, so they'll hire less workers. So, according to critics of the minimum wage concept, they say that when you have a high minimum wage, companies will prefer to hire less people, meaning it will create more unemployment. That's their logic. But studies have shown with empirical data across the world that when a minimum wage is set, it actually drives more prosperity in the economy. As workers earn more, it creates a cascading effect. It creates aggregate demand in the economy, which eventually benefits all the stakeholders in the country, from the private capitalists to the government to the middle class. It's also very clear that the turnover for that organization reduces by paying higher wages, right? So, despite some of the advantages which are proven, most companies prefer that they don't have a minimum wage concept. Most factories primarily prefer this in the manufacturing sector. And they believe that a higher threshold for a floor wage or a minimum wage will create challenges to hire more people, meaning lesser jobs will be created. But however, data proves otherwise. But the government has not defined the methodology of how the minimum wage will be defined or the floor wage will be defined, and what's the difference between the two. This is not very clear under the labor codes. So further clarity has to be provided over here. Then, coming to one very concerning aspect, the government inspectors are being rebranded as inspector cum facilitators. The job of an inspector is to check the establishment, check the facilities, the amenities, whether they are following the strict labor codes which are being enforced. So the enforcement lies in the hands of these inspectors, right? Previously, some of the poorly designed laws led to the Inspector Raj era, where inspectors became all too powerful, corrupt, and started extracting money from factories. And that is what affected India's economic growth as well. Today, the government is looking to rebrand these inspectors as facilitators for the companies. The problematic part here is that, let's say a company is in violation. For example, let's say a factory is not paying wages to its employees. This is called wage theft, which is an offense essentially. Or let's say a company is not paying overtime for the workers, though the workers have been exploited to do overtime work, but they have not been paid for it. So any such wage theft, these are violations of the labor laws. So when these violations come out, when complaints are raised against it, previously the factory owners would face actual legal action. Licenses could be suspended. And if criminal charges were to be pressed, they could even face arrest in some cases. Of course, criminalization of civil issues doesn't brood well for the economy. But right now, what the government has done, most of the companies and factories can get away with such violations just by paying a fine to the inspector. This is the inspector cum facilitator concept. So unlike before, inspector will not hold back the license or the approvals. Rather, inspector will levy a fine. The companies will pay the fine and get away with the offenses. Now imagine a factory or a company carrying out wage theft. They're making the workers work, but they're not paying them wages properly, right? They will realize it will make business sense to pay the fine to the government instead of paying wages to the workers. So you'll create a model where you're encouraging the private sector, maybe at least small, medium-sized companies, some large companies also have done it. They'll prefer that it's better to pay fine to the government, which might be few lakh rupees or few crore rupees, instead of incurring bigger expense on paying the workers who have already done the work. So this could actually facilitate exploitation of workers, where timely payments might be affected and companies will have no fear, right? They feel that even if there is a violation, big deal, they'll go end up paying a fine. That's it. So this creates a wrong precedent, which could compromise the rights and welfare of the workers in the country. So these are the concerns being flagged in this article. So please take up this practice question that focuses on ease of doing business and labor rights and labor welfare. So whether these labor codes, do they strike a balance? Critically examine, bring out the criticism as well, along with some of the positive aspects of these labor codes. Coming to the next topic, let's talk about the need for India to become thermally independent. What do you mean by thermal independence? There is a necessity right now for India to become more independent and create sovereign thermal energy which can sustain our economy. See, thermal energy is nothing but the reference to industrial heat. Across industries, heating is required for basic manufacturing and industrial processes, right? For example, remember yesterday we spoke about ceramic pottery. For ceramic pottery to shape the items, you need heat. Then when you look at ceramic tiles, when you look at textiles, for example, or let's say you look at pharmaceuticals, or look at metallurgical industries, even gems and jewelry, then even specialty chemicals, right? The list goes on and on. Many industries require heat. Now, currently, most of the heat required by the industry is generated through hydrocarbons, through hydrocarbon sources, either by burning coal or by burning oil or primarily by burning gas. So this dependency is creating a big challenge for India. In the context of the Iran war and the blockade on Hormuz Strait, India's dependency is getting exposed. See, with regard to crude oil, India is in a relatively safe space, as we have been discussing. We have sufficient buffer of at least 2 months, and there are new sources from where we can get crude oil. So with regard to petrol, diesel, aviation, turbine fuel, we have no issues, no problems. India will manage to overcome the crisis. Yes, we may end up paying more. Import bill will jump. But that's the reality of this war, this unnecessary, foolish war that US and Israel have triggered. It's hurting almost everyone in the world today, right? In ways you don't even realize. Each and every person on the planet is getting affected by this conflict as the Hormuz Strait remains blocked and a severe raging conflict exists in the West Asia region. Now, the biggest concern right now for India is the critical shortage of gas, which is emerging. See, government statements don't give out the real picture in a way. Government has been denying the extent of gas shortage, but media reports contradict those claims. I'll come to that government statement as well. Even yesterday, the concerned minister addressed the press and said that there is no shortage at all. Yes, there is no shortage of crude fuel, that is crude oil or petrol, diesel or ATF. But there is indeed a big shortage of gas, natural gas and LPG. And this is what much of the industry depends upon. I'm not only talking about hotels and other commercial establishments. I'm talking about industries that require thermal heat. Most industries rely on natural gas for heating. They heat water to generate steam, which is later used in various processes. Now you take, for example, textiles. For the activity of bleaching, dyeing, steam is used. You need temperatures of 100 to 400 degrees Celsius. Then if you take tiles industry, pottery industry, you need temperatures touching almost 1,000 degrees Celsius to shape and mold the objects. All these industries relied on gas supplies to generate the required thermal heat, what we call as industrial heat. So out of the total energy that we consume in the country, 25% of it accounts for industrial heat. 25% of the total energy is primarily used for such industrial purposes. Now, most of this heat is coming through hydrocarbon sources. See, relying on coal is not sustainable. It doesn't even make economic and financial sense, as coal is not known to be very efficient form of heat. At the same time, it's going to be harmful to the environment, contributing to more emissions as well. So relying just on natural gas and other hydrocarbon sources is never conducive for a country like India. See, right now, we import nearly 60% of the gas requirement. With regard to LPG, 60% of it is imported, around 50% of natural gas is also imported. And almost 90% of it is coming through Hormuz. We have a critical dependency on countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Oman. These are the major West Asian countries supplying gas and LPG to India, and we have a critical dependency on them. Right now, India's focus should be on how can we become more self-reliant in this domain. Like, how can we generate other forms of heat? Is there a more efficient form of heat which can be generated for industrial purposes? Right? We are just talking about thermal independence of India, the sovereign thermal independence that we need to achieve. So there are few options available. There are few alternatives where India can create sovereign thermal independence, where India can become self-reliant. One option is to move away from hydrocarbons like coal and natural gas and look at solar technology. I'm not talking about your regular photovoltaic cells. See, whenever we say solar energy, people assume the solar panels, which generates moderate amount of electricity, which powers your lights, fans, heating, etc. That is nowhere sufficient to generate industrial heat. Please understand this. The small solar modules you see in your homes, in commercial establishments, that is never enough to generate industrial level of heat, where you need 400 degrees, 1000 degrees. But for that, there is a solar alternative. It's called CST, Concentrated Solar Thermal. It's a slightly different technology, where a set of properly arranged mirrors are used to concentrate the solar energy to generate sufficient heat that can heat up water and turn it into steam, or heat up molten salt, and that heat can now be used for industrial activities. Many countries have experimented with this, and they've done really well to reduce dependency on natural gas and other hydrocarbon sources. For example, in Oman, recently, a big industry has made a switch towards CST to power its industrial processes. So you need advanced mirrors which are precisely arranged, precisely controlled. They basically channel the solar energy to one point, heating it up, generating sufficient thermal heat, which is required to meet the demands of industrial requirement. There is a company in Spain which has come out with plug and play option for CST power source. You can basically convert your existing industrial facilities and plug CST terminals, which will basically use solar energy but turn it into concentrated heat that is required for thermal heating. Then countries like Denmark. Denmark has gone one step ahead. Denmark has created pooled CST resource where an independent third party will set up a plant. They will generate that energy and they will sell it. They will sell that industrial heat to other companies which are located nearby. So a pooled concept is being created, like how private energy companies generate energy. In Denmark, there are companies working on CST projects, which is concentrated solar thermal projects. And the heat they generate is then shared to the industries at a certain rate. So countries have experimented with this, but India is many steps behind in this regard. Of course, solar energy is not very reliable, right? You can't rely on it 24/7. Most factories will work throughout the day, throughout night. Then how can CST be the solution? See, CST will give you independence when you mix it with other sources. Maybe throughout the day when solar energy is at its peak, you power your factory operations through solar power, through the concentrated solar thermal plants. Then bring in a mix of natural gas during the night time or whenever peak demand is generated, especially early hours or late evenings when the factory activities they really go into the next gear, the peak demand will kick in. Maybe during that point you can have a smart mixture of natural gas and CST, which will take care of the industrial heat demand. But rest of the day you can use solar powered CST energy, which reduces the dependency on natural gas. Maybe a factory using 100 tons of natural gas can reduce it to 30 tons, right? Which is better optimal utilization. And this reduces our import dependency, secures our sovereign space, reduces the import bill, and also ensures industries can be secured from global geopolitical shocks. So for this, the government needs to come out with a national thermal policy to encourage the installation of CST, give incentives for that. Because please understand, current form of heating is not very efficient. When you heat water in order to produce steam using coal or natural gas, etc., this is not the most efficient method. Much of the heat is being lost. The energy is being lost in conversion. So, powering up the industries with electricity produced through CST is the way out. You can basically have a mix of sources. If they are primarily powered by electricity coming from CST source or from regular solar plants or even from nuclear energy, even hydropower, you can accordingly use a mix of these sources. And if industries become primarily electricity powered instead of being gas powered or hydrocarbon powered, that will reduce the dependency on hydrocarbon imports for India. That will secure the sovereign thermal independence for India. So this is something India should prioritize in the coming years, something we have not done till now. Because the next few topics are related to this. It's related to the severe gas shortage being reported across the country. See, there's a lot of paranoia, panic, which has set in across the country because of severe gas shortage. Hotels have been shutting down. I'm sure you must have seen hotel menus have been toned down because they can't make all the food. PGs are shutting down. They have no food to provide to the students who are staying in them. Hostels are closing down. So any community kitchen, large kitchens, they can't operate because there is a major gas shortage. To what extent is this real? To what extent is it fake? Only the government can tell us. The government has said, you need not worry, everything is fine. But with regard to crude oil supply, yes, most things are fine as of now. Because as we discussed in the last few days, India has sufficient buffers for crude oil. So there's no problem with regard to petrol, with regard to diesel, with regard to aviation turbine fuel. So anything coming out of crude oil, there's no problem because we have a minimum 2-month buffer. We have 25 days of crude oil buffer, 25 days of petrol, diesel each. Plus, we are getting it from new sources from West Africa, from US, from Russia. So India can easily try and manage this, though we will pay a higher price. Correct? But when it comes to natural gas, LPG, there is indeed a big shortage which is coming up. Why? The problem is because there wasn't enough strategic planning on the Indian side. I mean, you can't blame just one government for this. This is about the strategic lacuna in India's policy making. We never created enough buffer for storing natural gas and LPG. Our buffer is barely 1 to 2 days maximum. That's why within 3 days of the blockade of Hormuz and the attacks on ships in Hormuz, we have started feeling the impact. We right now had just two storage tanks, one in Mangaluru in Karnataka and one in Vishakhapatnam. These are massive underground natural caverns which are redesigned, repurposed to store natural gas and LPG. But these two facilities can barely store like 1.4 million metric tons, and that can sustain hardly for 1 to 2 days. India's daily demand is 80,000 metric tons. So within 1.5 days, we'll exhaust the buffer, and with no new supplies, basically, there will be a critical gas shortage. That's the reason why Essential Commodities Act has been invoked, and non-priority sectors are not being supplied with gas anymore. The government has taken full control over gas supply and distribution, and 65% of it is already being diverted from the non-priority sectors towards priority sectors. So as of now, the priority would obviously be the household, to ensure that every household has sufficient cooking gas, which means hotels will be a least priority. Many industries will be a least priority. And reports are coming from major industrial towns that the gas shortage has already led to the shutdown of industrial operations. A town like Morbi in Gujarat, known for ceramic tiles, most factories have shut because there is no gas available and they don't have alternatives to switch immediately. Right? That's why electrification of India's industries is important. In thermal independence, electrification is important, where CST is the source of electricity, and maybe nuclear and hydropower and solar power is the source of electricity, not primarily hydrocarbons. Natural gas could be one of the fuel sources. It can be like a backup to deal with peak demand or to deal with lack of clean energy during night times, during winter months. So right now, the lack of storage, lack of buffer stocks, and the lack of electrification of industries is creating this major problem, which is likely to have a significant impact in the next few weeks to few months. That's why many countries are going back to COVID era like lockdown restrictions. Economic activities are being curtailed. Many factories, companies are considering uh, to basically ration whatever remaining gas is left with them. The bigger concern is how to deal with black marketing and hoarding. Whenever there is such panic, whenever fake news and rumors are spreading, if the government doesn't communicate properly, it will result in massive hoarding and black marketing. That's why Home Ministry has advised the state police to step up security at LPG plants and wherever cylinders are stored. And also, the concerned departments have been ordered to crack down on any hoarding and black marketing. But it's easier said than done. At the ground level, black marketing of cylinders has always persisted. Right? See, India has around 33 crore household LPG connections, but many of them, many more than this, would be availing connections from the black market. So you can't cut off those links overnight. You can't change that trend, that pattern of behavior of the people, where many of them don't have registered connections. They are used to getting connections illegally or getting cylinders through the black market. So this presents an unprecedented crisis for India. Upon this, we have neighboring countries asking India for help, right? As India is seen as the regional leader, countries like Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, they've all approached India because they are staring at a much serious crisis than India. That's why India has supplied diesel to Bangladesh, which we discussed yesterday, through the India-Bangladesh friendship pipeline. Depending on availability of sufficient resources, India is considering to help Sri Lanka, Maldives as well if the need arises. So this would be the expectation from neighbors, where India would help them in their energy security. So that's the reason why it's of utmost importance for India to take the right stand on the ongoing conflict between Iran, US, and Israel. There are reports that a couple of ships headed towards India have managed to cross the Hormuz Strait. There were reports previously that Iran has permitted vessels headed towards India to cross through without being targeted. But however, the government has clarified that Iran has given no such exemption. The Ministry of External Affairs has clarified no specific exemption has been given for ships headed towards India, which means they might be targeted, and that we have seen happening in the last 36 to 48 hours. A couple of Indian seafarers have been killed as well. That's another concern. Because in most of the ships, majority of the seafarers, the sailors are Indians. India is one of the biggest contributor in the world for merchant navy. So the lives of Indian seafarers is a direct risk. A couple of Indians have already lost their lives because of the war. So this is where India's position on the war is becoming problematic day by day. Yesterday, it was reported that PM Modi spoke to Iran's president, right? But however, critics and experts are pointing out that this is coming a bit too late because India's foreign policy approach appears to have slightly sided with US and Israel. And the balance that was there before, where India used to balance the Sunni powers, the Shia powers, and Israel and US, the move away from that balance, the move away from that multi alignment with a clear signal to side with US and Israel could end up creating unprecedented problems for India, which could not only hurt economic interests, but serious foreign policy challenges would come up because of this. See, yesterday, the new Ayatollah, the son of Ayatollah Khamenei, Mojtaba Khamenei, who has been injured in the first attack that happened on 28th Feb. Reportedly, he has injured his leg, suffered some serious damage as well. But he has been elected as the next Ayatollah, the next supreme leader by the Assembly of Experts, the 88 Assembly of Experts, which consists of the Shia clergy. They have chosen the next Ayatollah. And the Ayatollah has made a statement. He has said Iran is not looking to surrender. Rather, they are digging in. They are looking for further escalation of the conflict. The new Ayatollah has issued a warning to GCC countries, to the Gulf nations, to stop supporting the American bases. And until then, Iran is likely to continue targeting locations across West Asia region. In the meanwhile, Iran's president posted on social media, and he has placed 3 conditions of Iran to end the war and to agree to a ceasefire. What are the 3 conditions? Condition number 1, US, Israel, and all their allies must recognize all Iranian rights. Condition number 2, US, Israel, they have to pay for reparations to rebuild the Iranian economy, which has been destroyed because of the war. Because Iran's critical assets, cities, factories, industries have been decimated, flattened to the ground by US-Israeli bombardment. So Iran is demanding reparations, war reparations, where they will pay for the damages to rebuild and reconstruct the Iranian economy. And they want a future guarantee, a future commitment of no aggression against Iran from US and Israel. Now, I'm sure all of you can easily understand that these demands are not realistic, right? These are maximalist positions being taken by Iran. I'm sure all of you know that US, Israel will never agree to this. So if that is the point, then why is Iran making such maximalist demands? Why is it taking a maximalist position? What does it tell you about the ongoing war? Right? Who's emerging on top in this conflict? What should India do? By understanding these dynamics, you will get the right answer for India's foreign policy as well. See, Iran is not going to lose the conflict anytime. Rather, Iran is digging deep in and they are prepared for a prolonged conflict. They have studied American behavior very, very well, right? They know how to hurt interests of US, Israel, and the Gulf, right? Of course, US, Israel have military dominance, aerial superiority, economic superiority, but Iran has its own way of hurting them. Trump has said that US is profiting from the war. I mean, Trump has reached a level where he is not even hiding this anymore, right? He said this about Venezuela as well, that the action in Venezuela was about American profits and American control over oil. He has said the same about the Iran war, that as oil gas shortage escalates, as there is a bigger demand for energy, US will profit from it because US is one of the top producers of shale gas and oil. And American companies, which mainly sponsor Trump and his Republican Party, are going to profit from the conflict. US defense companies, military industrial complex, they're already profiting from the war with multi-billion dollar contracts being signed to replenish the arsenal, which is getting exhausted. So Trump is absolutely right. In a way, he's being honest. You need to praise him that yes, American companies are profiting from the war. But this war, which is built on the blood of thousands of innocent people, is hurting the whole economy, the whole world. And it's complicating the position for India, given the inclination India has shown towards Israel and the US. right? That's the criticism coming from experts. Even former diplomats are expressing concern about India's policy stand. See, Iran's position and the conditions for ending the war, it is deliberately designed to be rejected. Iran knows US, Israel will not accept this, right? It means Iran is prepared for a prolonged conflict. They want to further drag it because they know that in the long run, they can cause significant damage to the US, its image, its global standing. Right now, Netanyahu has dragged Trump into this unnecessary war, and Trump might believe that US is profiting from it right now, but eventually the countries might pay a significant price. Now look at India's position here. India has co-sponsored a UNSC resolution criticizing Iran for blockading Hormuz. Now some of you might say it's a right policy decision that India should condemn Iran because it's attacking Gulf countries which are close friends of India. It's launching missiles and drones at Kuwait, at Qatar, at Bahrain, at Dubai, and Abu Dhabi, right? And it's disrupting the movement of ships and vessels carrying oil and gas to India. So maybe some of you will say this is the right policy that India should condemn Iran, criticize them. But please understand, India never expressed any support when Iran's sovereignty was violated, when Iran's supreme leader was assassinated. See, it's not about ideology. You need not agree with the ideology of the Iranian regime. Nobody can, right? Of course, Iran's theocracy was indeed a major curse for human rights of the Iranian people. But however, Iran has been a critical partner for India. India had been a great friend of Iran and vice versa. It's not just a transactional relationship of oil and gas. Iran at one point, yes, so it was the top oil and gas supplier to India, but it's not just about that. Iran is a strategic partner. Many people assume it's just about Chabahar port and connectivity to Afghanistan and Central Asia. Beyond that, Iran has been critical for us to contain Taliban, to contain Pakistan, to keep a check on terrorist groups operating in the region. Now, this mess that US and Israel have created here could harm India-Iran relations, given the signals that India has sent in favor of Israel and US. Right, the visit of the Prime Minister to Israel just days before the attack, and the lack of criticism against the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, the lack of criticism against the violation of Iranian sovereignty. This is something which will be noted by the Iranian regime. As I said, the regime is going to survive. This is not my personal assessment. This is the assessment of the American intelligence. The CIA is convinced that the regime is not going to fall anytime soon. Right? Many people were rushing to declare victory for US and Israel, but wars are never so simple. Right? If I take you back to 2022 Feb, most experts and media reports pointed that Ukraine would be run through and Russia will completely occupy Ukraine within few days. But today, what has happened? Ukraine has fought back. It has become more resilient and it has even managed to deliver losses to Russia significantly. Right? So this war again is likely to take the same route. And again, if you look at history of American military involvement, be it in Vietnam, be it in Korea, be it in Afghanistan or Iraq, US always gets entrenched into such wars of attrition. It will end up causing significant human losses on all sides. It will end up spending billions and billions of dollars, leaving the world a bad place, and then they will exit and run away from these conflicts. Eventually, 10, 20 years from now, or 40, 50 years from now, it is countries like India which will bear the burden because Iran is not located in some other part of the world. It's right in our immediate neighborhood. If Iran has noted India's policy changes, right? Of course, they would have. The sponsoring of UNSC resolution criticizing Iran and not condemning the violation of sovereignty, not expressing condolences as well initially. India took 1 week to condole the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, which itself is being seen as a big policy mistake by former diplomats. So this is something which could hurt India's ties with Iran in the long run. The complete alignment being seen towards Israel and US raises a concern because US is not a reliable partner. Yes, Israel is critical as it supplies key defense technologies. It's a strategic partner, a key intelligence partner as well. But given the motives of Netanyahu and Trump, India is basically pushing itself into a dangerous pit with these countries. So there is a detailed interview in today's newspaper by two experts, a former Indian diplomat, Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, and Kabir Taneja, a well-known strategic expert. Even they are of the opinion that India would have done better if we remained multi-aligned. if we had maintained balance in our West Asia policy. For 7 decades, we had maintained this balance with Shia powers on one side, Sunni powers on the other side, Israel and US on the other side. Now, this delicate balance has been disturbed, which is understandable because, see, from US side, there is a lot of pressure on India. US has been arm twisting India, blackmailing, threatening India with tariffs and imposing economic costs on India. Israel remains a key strategic defense partner. There's no ignoring that fact. At the same time, the Sunni Shia powers are equally important for India. Given the size of the Indian community, the energy dependence that we have, right? The investments that matter to India, and also about connectivity, and more importantly, about countering terrorism, about keeping a check on Pakistan and its sponsorship of terrorism. Countries like Iran have always been critical. Maybe it's not spoken enough in the public domain, but India has a long standing history of covert collaboration with Iran's intelligence agencies to keep a check on Pakistan sponsored terror groups in the entire region. Now, US may not help India with this, but Iran has always been that long term partner. So, abandoning one country against the other has always backfired for India. That's why India's multi aligned policy, the balanced approach, is something which has worked well. And for that, you have to maintain your strategic autonomy, maintain your independence in foreign policy. But the more you fall under American pressure, the more you align with just one side, it sends the wrong signal to the others. Now, think about this. Some of you might think I'm biased, right? I'm just expressing the views of well known experts, former diplomats. Now, think about this. The Gulf countries, they are the ones facing the wrath of Iran, right? It's Bahrain, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Qatar, Saudi. They are the ones facing the entire wrath of Iran. None of them have chosen to attack Iran. Why? Iran is raining hundreds of missiles and drones on the neighbors, on the Gulf Sunni powers. None of them have retaliated even once. They have decided not to take offensive action against Iran as of now. It's not because they can't, they can, but they don't want to. Why? Because they understand that Iran would be their neighbor for the next many decades. US, Israel eventually will run away from this conflict. Eventually, the Gulf powers will be left to deal with Iran and the regime if it were to survive, which is likely to happen. The Arab countries, the Sunni powers are likely to face the impact. Plus, there is that understanding as well. Because prior to this war, prior to the October 7th attack by Hamas, the Sunni Shia powers had reached a detente. Saudi and Iran had made up, they had made peace between them. They want to explore that Muslim unity as well. So when the Gulf countries, which are already being attacked by Iran, they are not retaliating, right? It clearly sends a sign that India should have taken a more balanced position as well, right? The reason why we are being critical here, or the experts, right, who are speaking against it, is because probably it's already a little too late. The last 2 weeks, if you look at India's policy approach, there have been some concerning changes in Indian foreign policy, which was not there before. And the sudden shift that we are showing could have long term consequences for India. So, this is still a developing story. We are still in the fog of war, right? But we will continue to assess these developments. Next, a polity related article. The Supreme Court has clarified that for determining the creamy layer for OBC reservation, parental income cannot be the sole criteria to exclude the beneficiaries by placing them under creamy layer. Now, this ruling of the apex court has significant implications for the reservation policy. See, first of all, when it comes to concept of creamy layer, which was laid down through the Indra Savni judgment, there is a lot of confusion on how it actually operates, even with regard to UPSC civil services exam. Generally, in the application side, be it for OBC category and other forms of reservation where creamy layer applies, the assumption was certain candidates get automatically excluded from this reservation pool. That is, if family income, that is even parental income, which is computed here, if it is above 8 lakhs per annum, or if they own a certain amount of land, or if they are children of certain category of officials, those who hold constitutional posts, their children will not enjoy OBC reservation benefit because they were considered under creamy layer concept. Or children of group A government officials like IAS, IPS officers, children of employees working in public sector units. They were considered as part of creamy layer because of the income alone definition, parental income definition. They would all be above the 8 lakh bracket and all their children would be excluded from getting reservation. In a way, economic criteria was resulting in exclusion of socially marginalized communities. That was never the purpose of adding the creamy layer concept. So Supreme Court has now clarified that parental income alone cannot be used to set the creamy layer status, which means now the pool will expand. More candidates will become eligible in that regard. But again, no one knows how exactly this will be applied. Only the government and the courts need to clarify this. With this ruling, the court is essentially saying that even children of those who are holding constitutional posts, those who are holding group A government positions, children of employees of public sector companies, they will also be eligible for OBC reservation, even if the parental income is above 8 lakh rupees. So more and more candidates who are now under the general category would be eligible under OBC reservation, as they will basically be outside of the creamy layer bracket. So this ruling is set to trigger a major firestorm of sorts. It's likely to trigger a lot of concern as well. So further clarification would be needed here from the government side as to how exactly this policy will work. What's the criteria to exactly identify creamy layer? Who falls under it, who doesn't fall under it? So that is something we'll have to wait for. Next, the US has opened a trade investigation against 16 countries with whom it has a major trade deficit. See, the Trump administration is obsessed with trade deficit, assuming that a trade surplus for the other country is automatically a good thing and automatically a bad thing for the US economy. While that logic doesn't work, even a student of basic economics will tell you that deficit and surplus may not indicate anything per se. The US economy was benefiting by importing more because of the low manufacturing cost, low raw material costs in other countries, which was benefiting US consumers, making most goods and products affordable, right? So of course, US has a big trade surplus with most economies, and that has been the primary target of the Trump administration, levying the tariffs to address that deficit. So now that the Supreme Court in the US has struck down the tariffs as unconstitutional, the Trump administration has brought in a temporary arrangement, levying 10 to 15% tariffs for 150 days period. This is allowed under the US Trade Act, where the president can basically impose such tariffs in the 10 to 15% range with a maximum of 15% up to 150 days. Now the Trump administration is running to look for other opportunities. Since previous tariffs can't be brought unilaterally by the president without congressional approval, and these 15% tariffs will expire in another few months, they are opening investigation against countries that have a major trade surplus that includes India as well. Because last year, despite the 50% tariffs on India, India still registered a trade surplus of $58 billion. Now, this is unacceptable to the Trump administration. But see, don't forget, the tariff impact is still affecting India. The so-called trade deal, which was announced with so much fanfare by Trump as well as by the Indian government, it's likely to fall apart. With the Supreme Court ruling and with the Iran war going on, it's unlikely that the trade deal is even going to be signed. That's where critics are pointing out probably we rushed into the trade deal, accepting American conditions to not buy Russian oil, in a way aligning with American policy interests, thus compromising our strategic autonomy, which is now forcing us to side with them against Iran probably. So all these issues are intertwined. India buying Russian oil, India's policy on Iran, and India-US trade related issues. They're all interconnected right now. And the only thing which can help India right now is independent foreign policy making without worrying about implications from US. But that's unlikely to happen given the interlinkages that India has with the US economy, right? And given the madness with which US administration is being run. So the concern right now would be the tariff probe which has been opened by the US Trade Representative under the provisions of the Trade Act. This could be used to justify new tariffs against the countries that have a trade surplus against the US. So, in another few months, we might see fresh set of tariffs being brought against India. So, where does this leave the trade agreement that was announced earlier, which was about to be signed? So, what will happen to India's exports to the US? Because many exports from India, they are still facing 50% tariffs. Don't forget that. Don't assume the tariffs have been reduced to the promised 18%. It has been reduced to 18% for some sectors, for some products, not for all of them. For steel, for auto products, for aluminum from India, 50% tariffs continues, which is significantly hurting India's exports. So these are the new challenges coming up because of US trade policies. Next, China has introduced a new law focused on building ethnic unity, focused on national integration. It's called Promoting Ethnic Unity and Progress. That's the official English translation of this new law, which was passed by the National People's Congress that acts as the Chinese parliament, the parliament of sorts of the Communist Party of China. With majority votes, this new law has been passed that focuses on upholding China's ethnic unity. But in the name of protecting ethnic unity and national integration, this law is basically designed to further persecute and oppress ethnic minorities in the country. See, it's important to understand the demography of China. China has a population of roughly 1.4 billion people, correct? And it consists of 56 ethnic groups at least. There are 56 different ethnic groups. The majority group are the Han Chinese, almost accounting for 91% of the country's population. They're mainly concentrated in eastern and central parts of China. Clear? Majority of the country is dominated by one ethnic group, the Han Chinese, accounting for 91% of the country's entire population. The rest, they're all minorities, very, very small minorities. Important minority groups include the Tibetan Buddhists, the Uyghur Muslims from the Xinjiang region, the Mongols, the Manchu people, as well as the Hui community, and many others. These are some of the prominent ethnic minorities in China. They all feel oppressed and targeted by China. In Tibet, you know how Tibetan Buddhists have been crushed and oppressed by the Chinese authoritarian state. Same with Uyghur Muslims, where their religious rights have been curbed. And in the name of counterterrorism and counter radicalization, China is accused of violating religious rights and fundamental rights of Uyghur Muslims. So the Mongols, the Manchus, and other communities also face the similar oppression from the Chinese state. So this new law claims to promote national unity. It claims to promote national integration and ethnic unity. But in reality, it's promoting only the narrative of the Han Chinese ethnic community. It says that the Mandarin language should be treated as the most important official language. Minority languages are relegated to a second status. In all public affairs, in any government related conversation, public conversation, it's Mandarin which should be prioritized. While minority languages can be taught and learned, it's limited only to the communities. So there is no state level recognition for any of the minority languages, and Mandarin is being imposed on the entire population, including on the ethnic minorities. That is the primary language which everyone should follow, even the minority communities. Then, as well as their customs, including marriage, is being interfered with. China is encouraging interfaith and inter-ethnic marriage so that it can assimilate the ethnic identities and the minorities into one unified monolithic identity. While it is good for national integration, this could end up harming the minority rights and concerns. even religious institutions, minority institutions have been ordered under this new law to ensure that national unity is maintained, supremacy of Mandarin, and the Han identity is protected. See, please understand that minorities, wherever they are found, they are primarily in the frontier regions of China, right? Mongol and Manchu people are in the frontier areas. Uyghur and Tibetans are in the frontier areas. This is where China has annexed the territory, forced its occupation on them. And land is massive in size, while the population is less in these frontier territories. And these areas are rich with natural resources from Xinjiang to Tibet. So China's focus is primarily on controlling the land and the resources with scant regard for the people and their rights of the ethnic minorities. So this has been China's practice. It's about creating one singular Chinese identity that is primarily based on the Han Chinese community and the Mandarin language, with no regard for the other minority groups. Now, coming to the prelim section, one small topic from history. The famous Balirajgarh Fort in Bihar is in news. The article is mainly focused on the neglect of this historical site, how the Archaeological Survey of India has not focused enough on conservation of this important historical site, how the site has been neglected, how it has been damaged over the years, how we are losing important historical evidence which could shed light on the great civilizations that ruled over the Indian subcontinent. So, Balirajgarh Fort in the Madhubani district is at the very heart of the Mithila land, Mithili culture. It is believed to have been ruled by multiple empires, from Mauryas to Guptas to the Kushan and the Palas. And a lot of evidence has been found in this regard. From the northern black polished ware phase that dates back to 700 to 200 BCE, to even medieval era artifacts have been found, marking continuous habitation of this particular site in the Madhubani region, which constitutes the ancient and the medieval Mithila region that was ruled by great empires, from the Sunga dynasty to the Kushans to the Palas, Mauryas, and the Guptas. So, conserving such monuments, carrying out further excavation, further studies is essential to understand this part of early history and medieval history of India. But the site lies in a state of neglect, largely ignored by the Archaeological Survey and the State Archaeological Department. So with this, we bring the analysis to an end. I hope you guys have understood all the key topics. And if you like the session, do press the like button, share the video with other aspirants, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.